I want to talk about something Shedeur Sanders just did off the football field, because I think the way it's being covered in most places is missing the actual significance of what happened. You're either seeing it treated as a celebrity athlete doing a brand deal, routine, unremarkable, next story, or you're seeing it framed as some dramatic power move with breathless language that undermines the legitimate point underneath it. So let me try to give you the honest version, because the honest version is actually more interesting than either of those takes. Shedeur just finalized a multi-platform media and brand partnership that includes equity stakes, not a flat endorsement fee, ownership positions. And the reason that distinction matters, the reason I think it's worth a serious conversation, is because of what it reveals about how deliberately and how early this young man is thinking about his position in a league that spent considerable effort last spring trying to define that position for him. To understand the full weight of what just happened, you genuinely have to start with the 2025 draft. I know that feels like going backward, but the draft is the context that makes the business deal legible. So bear with me. Before the draft process unfolded the way it did, the pre-draft evaluation on Shedeur Sanders was clear. Not universally enthusiastic, these things never are, but clear. Nearly 5,000 passing yards across 2 seasons at Colorado, 37 touchdowns, completion percentages that compared favorably to established NFL starters, not just college contemporaries. The football IQ was visible on film in the way that genuine processing ability always is, in how quickly he identified coverage rotations, in where the ball went relative to when windows opened, in the decisions he made under pressure when the design play structure had broken down. Every serious metric pointed toward the top of the first round. Multiple analysts had him as the top quarterback in the class. That was the baseline. And then the atmosphere started changing. I want to be careful about how I describe this, because precision matters here, and I don't want to overstate what I can actually document. What's observable is the pattern, the way pre-draft quarterback evaluations shift when the concerns being raised are concentrated in categories that resist measurement: character, fit, intangibles, attitude. These words appeared around Shedeur with increasing frequency as the draft approached, attached to anonymous sourcing that couldn't be cross-referenced or challenged. He was described as too confident, too much like his father, which is fascinating when you consider that Shedeur Sanders is one of the most competitive and accomplished athletes in professional sports history. The way he presented at the combine, the jewelry, the comfort in his own skin, the absence of the performed humility that certain evaluators had apparently come to expect from quarterbacks seeking their approval, became material for concern in ways that are genuinely difficult to defend on football grounds. Team by team, something shifted. Interest that had seemed solid became conditional. Conditional interest became quiet. Quiet became absence. And on draft night, the player whose film and production had placed him at the top of the position group sat through 143 selections before the Cleveland Browns called his name in the 5th round. I've tried to think of a frame for that result that is both honest and fair, and the one I keep returning to is this: that draft outcome wasn't random. Statistical variance doesn't produce results that divergent from pre-draft consensus rankings without some systematic force operating underneath the surface. Whether that force was pure organizational miscalculation, something more uncomfortable, or some combination of both, reasonable people can disagree. What I don't think is genuinely debatable is that the result was institutional rather than coincidental. The league sent a message through its collective draft behavior. Shedeur Sanders received it. What happened next is where I think the story gets genuinely interesting, and where the business deal that just closed becomes meaningful rather than incidental. While the television conversation about Shedeur in the days following the draft was almost entirely focused on the slide itself, on the attitude narrative, on whether the criticism had merit, his team was having a completely different category of conversation. Not with NFL franchises about roster positioning, not with crisis management consultants about reputation repair, with brands, with media companies, with partners who had watched draft night unfold and drawn a conclusion that the league's established figures hadn't fully processed yet. The draft slide had not diminished Shedeur Sanders' cultural value. It had expanded it dramatically. This is the part I find genuinely fascinating from a business and cultural standpoint, and I want to spend real time on it because I don't think it's been explained properly anywhere. What the NFL created on draft night, probably without fully intending to, was one of the most emotionally powerful underdog narratives available in contemporary sports. A young black quarterback, trained by one of the greatest athletes in the history of American sports, producing at elite levels in one of the most scrutinized college environments in recent memory, gets passed over 143 times in favor of quarterbacks whose film didn't support their selections by any serious analytical standard. That story resonates with people who have never watched a down of football. It resonates because it maps directly directly onto experiences of institutional rejection that extend well beyond athletics, onto the experience of being evaluated and found wanting by systems whose evaluation criteria weren't fully transparent and may not have been fully fair. For an entire generation of young fans who already carried significant skepticism about whether the NFL's internal processes operated on a level playing surface, that image of Shedeur wading through 4 rounds and 143 picks was not an abstraction. It was a confirmation of something they already believed. And narratives with that kind of emotional architecture convert. They convert into audience loyalty that brands spend enormous budgets trying to manufacture and almost never achieve authentically. They convert into the kind of following that crosses demographic lines because the story being told is bigger than the specific circumstances that produced it. Shedeur's team understood this quickly and moved accordingly, building contractual infrastructure around that narrative momentum before it dissipated or got crowded out by the next news cycle. The specific structure of the deal is what separates it from the routine category of athlete partnerships, and I think this is where the real substance lives. The conventional ceiling of athlete brand partnerships is a flat fee arrangement. A company pays you a defined sum to associate your name and image with their product for a defined period. Your compensation is fixed. The company's upside from your association is theoretically unlimited. You get paid. They build equity. The deal Shedeur finalized operates on different terms. Equity stakes mean he holds actual ownership positions in the platforms distributing his content and carrying his story. When those platforms grow in value, as his NFL career produces moments that validate or complicate or expand the narrative that already exists around him, he participates in that appreciation financially and structurally. He's not a vendor selling access to his identity. He's a partial owner of the enterprise built around it. That distinction, once you sit with it for a moment, is enormous. I want to explain directly why this particular arrangement generates discomfort in the specific NFL ownership circles it appears to be generating discomfort in, because I think being vague about the mechanism undersells the point. The relationship between NFL franchises and their quarterbacks has functioned for decades on a reasonably stable set of assumptions about where leverage lives. The team controls the platform, the stadium, the broadcast relationships, the marketing infrastructure, the PR apparatus that shapes how a player is perceived publicly. A quarterback's cultural relevance, his visibility to audiences beyond the game's existing fan base, has historically been almost entirely dependent on the team's willingness to amplify and promote him. Perform and the team promotes you. Create friction and the team manages your visibility accordingly. That dynamic kept even elite quarterbacks in a position of fundamental dependence on organizational goodwill, because without the team's platform, the player's reach outside football was limited. Shedeur Sanders walked into Cleveland having already disrupted that dependency. The fan base he carries arrived before he played a professional snap. It was built through college performance, through the visibility of the Colorado program under his father, and critically, through the draft story that generated emotional investment from people who were following his situation precisely because the institutional treatment of him felt unfair. His social media presence and cultural footprint aren't products of the Cleveland Browns marketing operation. They exist independently of it. The media infrastructure he's now contractually positioned within generates income and audience engagement, regardless of whether Todd Monken's depth chart has him at 1 or 2 on any given week. That independence, the structural removal of the team's ability to control his visibility by controlling his playing time, is what makes this deal genuinely novel for a quarterback at this stage of his career. Jerry Jones built the Dallas Cowboys brand around the principle that the franchise is always the larger entity, that players derive their cultural significance from their association with the team rather than the other way around. That principle has been accurate for most of NFL history because the team's institutional reach has dwarfed any individual player's independent reach almost universally. What Shedeur is constructing challenges that principle at its foundation, not by being more famous than the Cleveland Browns, but by building a parallel distribution system for his own narrative that functions independently of whatever the franchise chooses to do with his story. Owners who have built their business models on the assumption that players need them more than they need players are watching a 24-year-old quarterback quietly dismantle the precondition that makes that assumption hold. The football case is the thing I want to come back to, because the off-field architecture is only meaningful if the on-field substance is real. And I think the skeptics asking whether any of this business sophistication matters if he can't hold up under NFL defensive pressure are asking a legitimate question that deserves a legitimate answer rather than dismissal. The answer is that the tape, examined independently by a scout with no organizational connection to Cleveland and no narrative investment in any particular conclusion, found a quarterback whose accuracy rates, decision-making under pressure, and overall performance profile compared favorably to the players being discussed as potential upgrades or replacements. 7 games without preseason preparation, without first-team reps, on a roster in damage control mode, and the statistical output was cleaner than quarterbacks selected in the top 4 picks of their respective drafts who had everything built around them from day one. That's not a fan's reading of the situation. That's what professional evaluation produced when someone removed the noise and looked at the football. The qualities the pre-draft criticism characterized as warning signs: the confidence, the expressiveness, the unwillingness to perform institutional deference for organizations that were in the process of undervaluing him, are functionally indistinguishable from the qualities that those same evaluators celebrate as leadership in quarterbacks they've already decided to believe in. What was called attitude in Shedeur's case gets called competitiveness in quarterbacks who arrive with more organizational validation behind them. The difference in framing reveals something about the evaluation process rather than about the player, and the fact that the coaching staff now most directly responsible for developing Shedeur, a staff that arrived in Cleveland without any prior commitment to him, has reportedly built its entire offseason structure around his development rather than a genuine competition, tells you what a fresh professional evaluation looks like when it isn't filtered through the pre-existing narrative. Shedeur Sanders' fingerprints are all over this situation, and I don't mean that dismissively. I mean it as a specific observation about the quality of preparation that went into positioning his son for an environment that Dion has spent 4 decades studying from the inside. He played in this league for 14 years. He watched how it treats young players, which traps get laid, where the institutional pressure points are, which forms of leverage actually matter, and which ones disappear the moment the organization decides to stop recognizing them. He built programs at Jackson State and Colorado that were explicitly about demonstrating what preparation and investment could accomplish in environments that had historically been underfunded and underestimated. He raised a son in full awareness of all of that. The business infrastructure Shedeur has just formalized isn't a response to a draft night surprise. It was almost certainly in development long before draft night confirmed what the environment was going to require. That's the level of preparation we're actually talking about. LeBron James constructed his business empire in year 8 of a career that had already produced multiple MVP awards and championships, built on top of a foundation of undeniable on-court performance that made his leverage inarguable. Shedeur is building equity infrastructure in year 1, before his first professional start, simultaneously with the performance, rather than after it has been fully established. That's a genuinely different approach to athlete empowerment in its timing and in its strategic intent. He's not waiting to earn the leverage and then deploying it. He's building an independent leverage base concurrently with the process of proving himself on the field. The people who have traditionally controlled the leverage in this industry are encountering a player who arrived having already secured some of his own. Cleveland gets to decide what to do with this. That's the simplest version of where things stand. If the organization gives Shedeur legitimate first-team development, builds its offensive system around him with the full commitment the situation appears to call for, and lets the football process produce the story that the pre-draft evaluations and the independent scouts' findings both suggest it's capable of producing, the franchise wins. The association with a player whose narrative is already nationally compelling, whose talent appears to justify the top-of-class evaluations that the draft process ignored, and whose off-field infrastructure will amplify every positive development. That's worth something real to a franchise that has been searching for exactly this kind of momentum for the better part of 2 decades. But if they hedge, if the Watson contract's presence distorts the depth chart decisions it shouldn't be allowed to distort, if ownership pressure produces the kind of half-measured developmental environment that has characterized too many Cleveland quarterback situations before this one, then the story of that mismanagement will be told by someone who now has the platform and the audience to tell it clearly and loudly. The franchise's ability to contain that narrative has already been structurally diminished. Shedeur has made sure of that, and I think he made sure of it on purpose, with full awareness of exactly what he was doing. Cleveland gets to choose which version of this story they appear in. The outcome for Shedeur either way has already been secured.